All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to FFT. I'm Trevor, and today we're talking about redraft leagues. Should you start one? Should you join one? Let's get into it. All right, so this is going to be the first of a four-part mini-series where we're going to check out all the different types of leagues. We're going to look at redraft, we're going to look at keeper, best ball, and dynasty. All right, so if you want to take a look at all of those, stay tuned, subscribe, check out the channel. If you want to know if fantasy football is for you at all, I recommend checking out one of the other videos that I've already made. I'll go ahead and link that in the description below. All right, so what is a redraft league? I'm going to break it down for you guys. I'm going to give pros, I'm going to give cons, and then I'm actually going to give my overall ranking at the end of this video as well compared to the other sorts of leagues that you can participate in. All right, so what is it? What is a redraft league? Well, a redraft league is exactly what it sounds like. You redraft your players at the beginning of every year. So it's a whole new roster at the beginning of every year. All players that you had at the end of last season become free agents at the beginning of the next season for other people and other teams to draft. Okay, so this means that you start from scratch at the beginning of every year. Redraft leagues, though, truly are the bread and butter of fantasy football. I really do think that fantasy football gained its popularity on this type of league, and I would venture to guess that this is still the most popular league out there for people to join. And I would probably say that simply because the barrier to entry for redraft leagues is probably the lowest. Like I said, you're starting from scratch every year, so it removes that sort of long-term commitment that you would have with these other leagues. You can kind of test it out and allow new players to try different strategies or theories, or go after certain positions or certain players, and you can, again, you start fresh at the beginning of the year, so it doesn't hurt you if you make mistakes. You can learn as you go, sort of thing. So let's start with pros. Let's jump right into it. What's a pro? What's a reason you should join a redraft league? Well, a redraft league definitely is the most beginner friendly league, and is extremely forgiving for new players. So I would really only ever recommend introducing someone to fantasy football with a redraft league. If they've never played fantasy football before, this is the place for them to do it and test it out. If they make a mistake and draft the wrong person or the wrong position, they can learn and adapt for the following year, like I already mentioned. All right, so they only have to live with that consequence for 1 year, and then they can move on and try out something else the following year. If you don't like playing fantasy football, give it a shot for a year, be committed, and then leave at the end of the year. All right, it's not a hard place. It's not that hard on commissioners, because it's a new slate. It's a fresh slate. If they were to bring in a new team, they're not having to acquire the team that you've built like they would in Dynasty or in Keeper. They get to start fresh. They get to make their team their own at the beginning of each year. So it makes it easier on the commissioner to find a new person, and then on the rest of the league as well. They're not as bummed about you leaving. Obviously, they'll miss you, but it's more about the fact that the new person coming in isn't acquiring something that's good or bad. Everyone starts with a clean slate. So you will not piss off the commissioner if you're in a redraft league if you decide to leave after a year, as much as if you're in a different league. It really is not that big of a deal. But with that said, redraft leagues, even though they're very beginner friendly, they can be still extremely competitive. Whether you're a seasoned player or not, you can jump into a redraft league and just be just as competitive as you can with any of the other leagues. All right. So, but knowing your teams and positions and players at every level, and any league, more or less, will definitely still help you out. Okay. So the more you know about fantasy football, the smaller the chance you have to create a team that you're not stoked about. So obviously, still having that knowledge and that experience with fantasy football will give you a leg up, and allow those competitive players to play competitively. Another pro: if someone gets hurt or retires, you're only stuck with that player for this year. You start fresh at the end of the year. All right. This actually happened with my brother in one of our redraft leagues a few years ago. He drafted Phillip Rivers the year that he retired. He actually drafted him 2 hours before Phillip Rivers announced his retirement. And so obviously he was stuck with that player. The draft had concluded by the time that that was announced. And it was a huge bummer, obviously, but he only had to deal with the consequences for a year. Um, so, yes, it was a bummer, but again, he could, only has to deal with it for that season. The other pro is that these leagues really can be any size compared to any of the other sorts of fantasy football leagues. These probably give you the most wiggle room when it comes to sizes of leagues. So, how many teams are you going to have? Whether you want 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, maybe even 16, you can really make that work with any size league. So, whether you're doing it with like maybe just your family or just a couple friends, you can make that work with a redraft league. Obviously, if you have less teams, your teams are going to be stacked. You're going to have all the best quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. You're really going to have the cream of the crop, and your draft strategy is going to be a little bit different because you're going to be picking best of the best, really high floor sort of players. Whereas if you're drafting with 16, 14, 12, 10 teams, maybe you're looking for players that have a little bit more upside because you're kind of scraping by near the end of the draft, trying to find maybe some up and coming rookies or somebody that maybe hasn't shown up yet but has the potential to. So draft strategy definitely changes, but you definitely within a redraft league you have the ability to kind of maneuver within that. All right, let's jump into some cons. So these are generally the types of leagues where commissioners have the most headaches. All right. As a commissioner, you're either having to spend a lot of time explaining the rules or strategies to these new players, which isn't a big deal. Obviously, like if you're okay with, especially if you're playing with friends or family, who cares, right? You're just explaining the rules to these guys. You want them to be involved. If they know more, they're going to be more invested. So spend that time, help them up. But as a commissioner, you will need to make sure that you do that with these new players jumping into your leagues. It's prone to having that. So just be prepared for that if you are a commissioner. You also might have to deal with players who aren't as invested or maybe even leave the league altogether at the end of the year. I've been parts of leagues where this has happened, both where we've had uninvested players, they're not paying attention to parts of the league, and that can be super detrimental and kind of kill the league energy, I guess you could say. And also, if players are leaving at the end of the season as well, that can also just make more work for you as a commissioner. Obviously, like I said earlier, it's not as bad as if somebody left in a dynasty league or a keeper league. It's not as hard to fill those spots back up. But obviously, it's still something that you might have to deal with. But really, what you're trying to avoid, if you could avoid anything, you want to avoid low participating players. So players with low participation, even if they're new, who cares? As long as they're participating and they're willing to learn and engage in trades, engage in communicating with the league, and engage in strategy and those sorts of things, and learn and develop. That's a perfect person to have as part of the league. You just don't want to draft somebody or bring somebody into the league that doesn't participate. You want to avoid that at all costs. Just because they're a seasoned player or have played fantasy football in the past doesn't necessarily mean that they're automatically a good fit for your league. You really want to talk with them and make sure that they are committed and will be a good participant in the league, because that's really where the fun of fantasy football comes from. Engaging with each other week to week, trash talk and trades and all that sort of thing, and participating in the draft, whether it's in person or online or however you're doing it, that participation is huge. So as a commissioner, especially, look for those types of players. But again, because it is a beginner-friendly type of league, you need to be aware of those sorts of things. Also, just like how this type of league can be forgiving for a lot of players, it also happens to remove any sort of potential for someone to build off of a league too. So you really have to do your best to avoid becoming attached to certain players. So like, I'm a Tennessee Titans fan. My wife's from Nashville. I've fallen in love with Derrick Henry over the years. In a redraft league, you're not guaranteed to get him, so you really have to kind of temper your fire for a certain player, how excited you can be for somebody, because who knows if you get them again next year or not. If they're great, obviously other people are going to be trying to get them. So that can be a downside, especially if you fall in love with a certain player. So also the ability that you have to retain players, not simply for the ability of, the fact that you love them. If they do happen to be great, other people are going to be wanting them, right? So let's take Bijan Robinson, for example. Let's use him. Let's say you draft him this year, 2023. You draft him this year as a rookie, and you take the risk. You say, hey, I'm going to draft Bijan over Christian McCaffrey. If you take that risk and he ends up being the guy that everyone wants, let's say he's scoring over 20 fantasy points a week, and that risk paid off. Well, unfortunately, that risk and the reward part of that risk goes away after this year. And everyone else gets a benefit off of the fact that you took that risk, and you maybe scored this year, but next year, man, now the chance of you getting him back are pretty slim, because everyone's going to be wanting to get him. So that risk that you took, it might be great and it might pay off for a year, but it's not going to last as long as it would in like a dynasty or a keeper league. So just keep that in mind. All right, so what is my personal ranking when it comes to redraft leagues? Out of the 4 leagues, dynasty, redraft, keeper, and best ball, where 1 is the best and 4 is the worst, redraft leagues actually fall at the number 3 spot for me. Why is that? Well, I have plenty of redraft leagues. I participate in plenty of them. I actually love them a lot. I simply just miss out on the risk versus reward when it comes to redraft leagues. I really love the ability to build on decisions that I've made in the past and really make a team my own from year to year. Yes, this is a league that is great for beginners. It's great for seasoned players. This is a perfect league. It's obviously extremely popular and still is one of the most popular types of leagues. But personally, this falls at the number 3 spot. So let me know what you guys think. I would love to check out the comments. Leave me a comment and let me know what's your favorite type of league. Next week, we're going to be talking about one of the other 3 types that I've yet to hit on: dynasty, keeper, or best ball. We'll kind of run through the pros and cons of each one of those. But until then, I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you next time. See you guys.